Welcome in to Outkick the Show, Friday edition. I am Clay Travis. I hope all of you are having a fantastic time wherever you may be. The Raiders have officially lost their mind. They are letting the inmates run the asylum, the former Texans coach, I believe, said. This is crazy. We're going to get to that in a moment. I hope all of you are having fantastic Fridays. We're going to talk Antonio Brown. We're going to talk college football gambling picks. We are going to talk the Packers, Bears. We are going to talk Tyreke Hill and Hugh Freeze coaching in a dentist chair. Let's start with Antonio Brown, which this entire story is off the reservation. It is utterly insane. If you haven't been following the Antonio Brown saga, on Wednesday at practice, after he had posted a $54,000 fine that he had been given by the Raiders, he approached Mike Mayock at practice and began to curse him and berate him, including calling him a cracker and threatening to beat his ass. All right? The Raiders sent Antonio Brown home for 1 day and announced today that he will play on Monday, and that is the end of the story. Antonio Brown supposedly addressed his teammates, broke down in tears, and he is now playing on Monday. This is an unbelievable story because the precedent that the Raiders have set here is for their team, if you threaten to beat the GM's ass at work, if you post private disciplinary letters on Instagram, and if you insult the GM while threatening to beat his ass by calling him racial slurs, you will miss 1 day of practice. 1 day of practice, that's the punishment. That's the precedent that the Raiders have put in place now. Now, I want you to follow me along the flow chart here and imagine that the Dolphins, who have a black GM, has decided that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to start over Josh Rosen, a white quarterback. What if Josh Rosen showed up at practice, threatened to beat the GM's ass, and called him a racial slur? And then the Dolphins responded by only suspending Josh Rosen for 1 day. What would happen in that scenario? What would happen in that scenario? The entire NFL would come undone. The entire NFL would lose its mind if a white player threatened to beat up a black GM and called him a racial slur. He only missed 1 day at work. They would lose their mind in the left wing of this country. There would be protests outside of NFL stadiums. There would be picketing. There would be mass uproar if one guy did it and he was white and the GM was black. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. And I think it's just an interesting question. People say, well, that's different. I want you to think about this and why it's different. Mike Mayock, to my knowledge, the Raiders GM, has never done anything racist in his entire life. He has never owned slaves. His family has not owned slaves at minimum for 150 years. Shouldn't you be judged by your own actions as an individual, not by the history of this country or this world? Why should, in this scenario, people say, well, it's different, he's a white guy? Shouldn't we judge everybody based on their own life as opposed to the history of the country? I know that people in America think, some people, that the only bad thing that's ever happened in the world was that slavery existed for 80 years in America. That's all it did, by the way. For 80 years, from 1783 until 1863, slavery existed in America. Huge stain on American history. But it's a small fraction of our history as a country. And prior to 1783, slavery existed in America, but we were British colonies. So if you're angry about slavery existing prior to 1783, we weren't even a country. So that should be an issue with Great Britain, with England's history. But what I think is interesting here is how precedents aren't evenly applied across the way. People can say, well, cracker's not a racial slur. Well, if it's intended to be a racial slur, then the importance here is what Antonio Brown was intending when he made that slur against Mayock. He said it because he wanted it to be a slur. And so I think this is an incredibly fascinating pivot point for the NFL, because from this point forward, it's really hard to argue that the NFL is systemically oppressing anybody or a racist league when the standard the Raiders just said is if a black guy threatens to beat his boss up at work and also calls him a racial slur, he's going to miss 1 day of work. Coming on the same day that Tyreke Hill, who beat and choked his pregnant fiance, gets a $53 million contract. The truth of the matter has always been and will always be, your talent is predicated on what you can do and what you can say in much of the world. And while lazy people want to say race matters, the truth of the matter is green matters and talent matters. And the Raiders made a decision that Antonio Brown is more talented than his racial slurs matter or than his threats to beat up his boss at work matter. Now, the problem here is this doesn't actually work in any way in the rest of the world, right? In the rest of the United States, if you threaten to beat up your boss at work and if you also insult him using racial slurs, you are done and you're not going to work there anymore. So congratulations to Antonio Brown for being in this position. This is real life. This is evidence for a lot of people why many people, including me, think that the victim ideology is so pathetic. It creates a lot of opportunities for people to be perpetual victims. Oh my God, you grab your pearls, you fall down onto the fainting couch, and you're unable to overcome a word that somebody uses because it totally triggers you. Well, adults have to be able to respond to insults. That's part of what being an adult is. Being able to handle people who behave in an irrational manner. Mike Mayock did. I'm curious to see what exactly is going to end up happening. I think that Antonio Brown is a disaster, and that there is no doubt that Antonio Brown should be, in my opinion, kicked off this team, and he should no longer be allowed to represent the Raiders. The reason why the Raiders are the organization that they are is because of decisions like this. So I think the Raiders blew it. If I were running that franchise, I would have fired his ass. I would have cut him out of the rest of the contract. I would have not paid him another dollar. I would have sent the message, doesn't matter how talented you are, we accept a basic level of decent work as a member of the Raiders. You're a 4-12 team already. With Antonio Brown, you might be a 6-10 team, but you're setting the precedent with John Gruden and Mike Mayock that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you have talent. I think that's a problem. I think culture matters over time, and your culture will erode if you make bad decisions dealing with players. That's why the New England Patriots win at a high level, because people buy in there and they know that Bill Belichick is in charge and his decisions govern. We still don't even know why Malcolm Brown didn't play in the Super Bowl, and he was the starting corner because Belichick decided it didn't make sense. I damn sure guarantee you it was for a lot less, I would bet, than what happened with Antonio Brown. But that's why the Patriots are the Patriots and the Raiders are the Raiders. College football gambling picks. I'm going to get you rich, kids. You ready for the college football gambling picks? I'm going to first give you the two big games. What do I think is going to happen in Texas A&M against Clemson? Right now, that line, I gave it out to you. Tap the veins, boys and girls. Tap the veins. Blood bank guarantee. on the Aggies. Texas A&M is going to cover the 17.5, all right? Last year in Kyle Field, the Aggies almost beat Clemson. They lost 28-26. Kellen Mond, their returning quarterback, threw for 430 yards. He will be back in Clemson, and he will be playing very well. Also, the Aggies have covered 62% of their out-of-conference games since they got into the SEC. That's the best in the SEC. Jimbo Fisher went 4-2 as a head coach against Clemson. He knows Dabo. He knows the Clemson system. I like the Aggies. Again, tap the vein, boys and girls. I love the Aggies because they are going to cover. I think that Clemson wins. They cover by 7. Clemson wins by 7. The Aggies cover by 10. All right, I'm also on the over in that game. What do I think is going to happen in LSU, Texas? This one's a little bit more nerve-wracking. I gave out LSU -5. This line is ticked all the way up to 7. It opened at 3. That's a big line move, guys, for LSU going on the road against Texas. Tom Herman has been fantastic as an underdog. But I think Joe Burrow and this offense is a difference maker. I think that Joe Burrow is going to have a great game. I'm not buying into the young defense of the Texas Longhorns. As a result, I like LSU -5. But if this line ticks up over 7, and it might, if it goes up to over 7 or 7.5, 8, any of those numbers, then I think you have to buy back on Texas, because over a touchdown on the road at night in a major college football game makes me nervous here. But as long as it's under 7, I'm on LSU. Those are the two big games. All right, I got a bunch of other picks for you here, and I'm about to read them for you. And let me run through them. I love the over in Vandy Purdue. I think Purdue's going to score with Jeff Brom on almost everyone. I don't think that Vanderbilt has a bad offense. I think Georgia's just got a great defense. I think Vandy will score on Purdue, much like Nevada did. This line is 55. I think it's way too low. I'm not buying into the Vandy defense. I'm buying into the offenses on both these teams. Over 55, Vandy Purdue. Syracuse at Maryland. Dino Babers, all he does is score points, except last week against Liberty. I'm going with the over. Maryland scored 79 in their first game. I'm going with the over in Syracuse, Maryland. West Virginia, Mizzou. This line is now, I believe, some places under 14. I love Mizzou here. Great stat for you. In their last 12 games where they have been an underdog, West Virginia is 1-10-1. Let me repeat that. In the last 12 games where West Virginia has been an underdog, they are 1-10-1 against the number. Make it 1-11-1. They're going to lose on the road against Mizzou. I think Mizzou bounces back in a big way after a tough loss against Wyoming. Cincinnati. Good stat for you in their game against Ohio State. Ohio State came out and scored the first 28. After that point, FAU outscored. Think about this. FAU outscored Ohio State 21-17. I think Cincinnati's got a good defense. They've had an extra couple of days to get ready. Luke Fickell used to be the head coach at Ohio State. I don't believe that Justin Fields is very good at throwing the ball out of the pocket. I think he's an athletic quarterback. If you watch some of that game against FAU, he struggled when they made him throw. I'm not a believer in 100% this Ohio State offense yet. I think Cincinnati covers the 16 against Ohio State. A&M, I already told you. I like the over in that game against Clemson. Illinois, -20 against UConn. UConn struggled to get past Wagner, 24-21. I think that Illinois is going to go on the road and boat race them. Lovie Smith's crew gets it done. BYU at Tennessee. I love Tennessee to bounce back here and win. I don't necessarily love this game around 4. I got it at 3. I think it's going to be low scoring, tight game. I believe Tennessee gets it done, comes back, wins against BYU in Jeremy Pruitt's second game this year. Tennessee gets the cover over BYU. Arkansas, Ole Miss. This game got up to 7. I thought it was crazy. It's ticked down to around 6. I like Arkansas here. I don't think Arkansas or Ole Miss are very good, but this is crazy. Last 4 games, Ole Miss by 4, Arkansas by 1, Arkansas by 4, and Arkansas by 1. 7 points in this game is insane. Stanford at Southern Cal. Wrong team is favored here. You're telling me both teams have backup quarterbacks in, and which makes coaching matter even more. David Shaw has won 8 of his last 12 against USC. And you are telling me that Clay Helton is favored in this game. Totally wrong. Totally blown. I'm telling you, Stanford wins outright as the underdog of 3 points. Those are my picks. I'm also like the over in FAU UCF. It's around 67.5 or so. I also like the over there. Bears-Packers last night. Bad look. Bad look for Mitch Trubisky. Not a great look for Aaron Rodgers. Ugly game. Huge win. Got to be honest. Division game on the road to start the season. Huge win for the Packers. I'm not optimistic about Mitch Trubisky's future. Tough break for Bear fans to have to sit around and realize that they took Trubisky over Deshaun Watson and even worse over Patrick Mahomes. That is a tough spot to be in. To have passed on Patrick Mahomes, who's maybe going to be the greatest quarterback of his generation, and to have passed on Deshaun Watson, who I'm still a little bit iffy about solely based on health, doesn't make a lot of sense at all. I'm telling you right now, Packers, Bears, ugly game. Big win, though, for the Packers. I think if they can win in week 2 against the Vikings, Packers are on a roll. They get 2 straight division wins out of the gate. Tyreke Hill just got a 3-year, $54 million contract with $35 million guaranteed. I believe in second chances. I even oftentimes believe in third chances. The NFL is a perfect example of a league that only cares about your production. They don't care if you're black, brown, green, blue, whatever you are. They don't care about your sexuality. They care about your production. And Tyreek Hill is productive on the field. He just got $35 million guaranteed, even though in the offseason he was investigated for child abuse. Even though he's already pled guilty to choking and strangling his then fiance, who I believe he is still with or was with for a while. This is the real NFL, not the NFL that people want to convince you is so unfair and systemic oppression and all this privilege and everything else. The only thing that matters in the NFL is production. It's the ultimate privilege. It's a meritocracy. That's what I like about the NFL more than anything else. Finally, Hugh Freeze. Last week, he coached in a hospital bed against Syracuse. This week, he is coaching in a dental chair against one of the Louisiana schools. This is absolutely unbelievable. To go, first of all, the hospital bed coaching is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen from a humor perspective that wasn't intended to be funny of all time. But following it up with a dental chair is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever seen. I want Hugh Freeze to be successful. I like a comeback story, but this is off the charts, absurd, and ridiculous. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for watching. I'm going to go do Lock It In now in a little less than an hour. 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, 2:30 Mountain, 1:30 Pacific. Go bet the games. 14-7, 67% winners in week 0 and week 1 combined. I hope that we are going to be able to win again big in week 2. Don't fade the picks. Respect the picks. Blood Bank guarantee. 2-0 so far this year. About to make it 3-0 with Texas A&M covering the 17.5. I love all of you. DBAP, unless you need to SBAP. My name is Clay Travis, and this has been Outkick the Show. See y'all. I'd like to be able to get out. There we go. See y'all. Thank you, Facebook.